She walked in wearing the dress her daughter once borrowed, and every eye followed her. He was meant to marry her daughter. But one whisper changed everything, and by the time she left, nothing was the same. Sophie never intended to go. The invitation to the Sterling Foundation Gala had arrived in a crisp, white envelope she almost tossed with the rest of the week's mail. It had been years since she was part of that world. The ballrooms, the sponsors, the politely brutal social hierarchy. But something about seeing her name printed in perfect serif font beneath the words "former strategic partner" made her pause. She was 42, not ancient, not invisible, but old enough to know when a room isn't designed for her anymore. And this one, she suspected, had never really been. Still, on Friday evening, she stood in front of her hallway mirror wearing a soft navy dress that didn't ask for attention and a pair of borrowed heels that whispered elegance instead of screaming for it. Her silver chain necklace rested above her collarbone like punctuation. Subtle, complete. The event was held at the Winthrop Grand. Crystal chandeliers, champagne pyramids, conversations like performances. Sophie had once commanded rooms like this. She'd been the calm in chaos, the one people trusted to make sense of money, vision, and politics all at once. But that was before the divorce. Before Isla. Isla had been Sophie's mentee for nearly a decade. Bright, bold, beautiful. The kind of young woman who didn't just enter a room. She rearranged its gravity. Sophie hadn't seen her in months. Not since Isla had taken a job under Elias Sterling, the elusive CEO who rarely made public appearances, but whose decisions made headlines. As Sophie stepped into the ballroom, her eyes landed on them instantly. Isla, radiant in emerald green, laughing at something Elias had just said. She leaned in close, too close, her hand grazing his arm like it belonged there. And Elias? He was taller than she remembered from photos. Late 40s, maybe early 50s, with silver at his temples and a face carved from discipline. Composed, remote. But in that moment, as he nodded politely to Isla, Sophie noticed something in his eyes. Not boredom, exactly, but detachment. A man surrounded by noise who didn't hear any of it. Sophie turned toward the bar. If she left now, no one would notice. She kept her promise to herself. Show up, look poised, disappear. Mission accomplished. But before she could move, a voice came from behind her. Calm, low, controlled. You look like someone who just remembered they left the stove on. She turned, and there he was, Elias Sterling in the flesh, close enough that she could see the slight crease at the corner of his eyes. He wasn't smiling. Not quite, but there was a softness there. Curiosity, even. Sophie didn't flinch. Funny, I was actually wondering why I ever agreed to come. You and me both, he said, nodding toward the crowd. But I've learned to stop making promises to myself about avoiding these things. She raised an eyebrow. You seem to be managing it well. I've had practice. There was a beat. Not awkward, just charged. Like neither of them wanted to fill it too quickly. Would you let me buy you a drink? He asked. She almost said no. Out of instinct. Out of self-protection. But something about his presence made her pause. He wasn't posturing. He wasn't circling her like a man on the hunt. He was present. And after years of being talked at, dismissed, or politely overlooked, presence felt revolutionary. Sure, she said, as long as it's not tequila. That version of me is retired. He laughed, an actual laugh. Quick, quiet, real. They moved to the bar, ordered something simple. And just like that, they slipped into conversation. Nothing heavy, nothing rehearsed. She asked him about his worst investment. He told her it involved a wellness tech startup, a goat, and a lawsuit. She told him about the time she once got locked out of her own speaking event and had to bribe a busboy to sneak her through the service entrance. It wasn't flirtation. It was something more dangerous than that. It was ease. Eventually, their drinks emptied. The music shifted. The crowd changed shape. He didn't ask for her number. She didn't offer it. But just before she turned to leave, he said, "It was good to talk to someone who doesn't sound like a press release." She smiled. It was good to be someone again. And as Sophie walked back to her car, heels in hand, heart unexpectedly light, she realized she hadn't once thought about Isla since he first spoke to her. Not in jealousy, not in comparison, because in that moment, for the first time in years, Someone had looked at her like she was the only woman in the room. Sophie didn't expect him to follow up. Men like Elias Sterling didn't chase. They didn't linger. Their attention was like light, warm for a moment, then gone. The kind of attention you didn't expect to return because it never needed to. But the next morning, an email arrived. No subject line, no greeting, no fluff, just a single line. You made last night tolerable. If you ever feel like doing that again, let me know. She stared at it for 3 full minutes. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, rewriting the same sentence 3 times before she landed on Wednesday. I don't do small talk without coffee. His reply came 4 minutes later. Then I'll bring the coffee. They met at the only cafe in the city Sophie still trusted, a narrow, unassuming place with crooked tables and windows that fogged in the winter. It was the kind of place that didn't make you perform. She arrived 15 minutes early, not to impress him, to center herself. By the time Elias walked in, precise, unhurried, she'd already chosen the table in the far corner, beneath a watercolor of a bicycle that had never been straightened. He carried 2 cups. Black. No sugar, he said, setting hers down. She raised an eyebrow. You assume a lot. You strike me as someone who doesn't like being softened. That caught her off guard, but she covered it with a small smile. You're not wrong. They sat, and the conversation, much to her surprise, didn't sputter. They didn't talk about the gala. They didn't talk about Isla. They didn't even talk about work. Not really. Instead, he asked her about cities, places she'd lived, her favorite season, whether she preferred sunrises or late-night rain. She answered more than she meant to, not because she was trying to impress him, but because he was listening. She told him about Rome, about the months she lived there on scholarship at 22 and how it had ruined her for quiet cities, about her fear of becoming irrelevant, not to the world but to herself. And when she paused, unsure if she'd said too much, he said only, I know what it feels like to be needed for what you've built, not who you are. That silenced her, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. They sipped their coffee in comfortable silence. Then he asked, do you always keep people at arm's length? She tilted her head. Do you always go straight for the jugular? His smile was faint but real. Only when I'm curious. And for a man like Elias, someone whose entire life was curated, protected, guarded, curiosity felt like the biggest compliment of all. They stayed longer than they meant to. She learned he hated cilantro, that he couldn't sleep on planes, that he once flew to Berlin and back in 24 hours just to avoid a wedding speech. He learned she was a morning person, but hated the sound of alarms, that she couldn't cook rice to save her life, that she still wrote in a paper planner. By the time she stood to leave, something had shifted. She wasn't flattered. She wasn't dazzled. She was seen, and that was far more dangerous. Back in her apartment, she hung her coat and didn't turn on the lights. The glow from the street lamp outside was enough. She sat by the window with a blanket and let the stillness settle. But there it was. Isla. The name came like a knock in the dark. Isla, who had once cried at Sophie's kitchen table after her first job interview. Isla, who had called her the woman I want to be, but sharper. Isla, who had shown up at the gala on Elias Sterling's arm like it meant nothing at all. Sophie had never felt possessive of her, not in the traditional sense. Isla had ambition, and Sophie had respected that. But now the line between mentor and rival felt blurry, not because of jealousy, but because of proximity. She had met Elias after Isla. She had spoken with him before knowing how close Isla had gotten. But that didn't change what she knew in her gut. This wasn't going to stay simple. And yet, when her phone buzzed with a message, no name, just, you were right about the coffee and the company. She replied without hesitation. Next time I'm buying. And as she hit send, Sophie felt something she hadn't in years. Not victory, not vanity, hope, the dangerous kind. Sophie didn't tell anyone about the coffee. Not because it was a secret, because it felt like something she didn't want the world to touch yet. Not with commentary, not with assumptions, not even with well-meaning curiosity. But the universe, as always, had its own timing. 3 days later, she was at the grocery store, deciding between 2 brands of overpriced olive oil, when her phone buzzed. A name she hadn't seen in months. Isla, are you free tonight? Sterling is hosting a private reception. You should come. Would love to catch up. Sophie read the message twice. Once for the words, once for the subtext. She didn't reply right away. She drove home, took a long shower, let the steam swirl around her like armor. Then at 7:42 p.m., she stepped out of a cab in front of a private gallery on Madison. Sleek, mirrored, understated in the way only wealth could afford to be. Inside, the space buzzed with quiet elegance. People murmured over champagne flutes and shadowy installations. Sophie spotted Isla immediately, effortlessly chic in black satin and red lipstick, holding court near the far wall. And standing beside her, with a glass of bourbon in his hand and a familiar watchful stillness, Elias. He didn't see Sophie at first, but Isla did. Her face lit up with surprise, with something unreadable, and she crossed the room in quick, graceful steps. "You came," she said, embracing Sophie lightly. "I wasn't sure you would." "Last-minute decision," Sophie replied, returning the hug just enough. "You look amazing," Isla said too brightly. Classic, like the one woman in the room who doesn't have to prove anything. Sophie smiled, but not with her eyes. Some of us were tired from proving. There was a flicker. Isla caught the tone, just barely. Before she could respond, Elias turned. His expression shifted the instant he saw Sophie. Not dramatically, just enough for anyone watching closely to know something passed between them. He walked over, slow, calm, as if it were inevitable. "Sophie," he said, his voice quieter now. "Didn't expect to see you here." She raised her glass. "Surprise." Isla watched the exchange with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You two know each other?" There it was. Sophie didn't blink. "We met at the gala," Elias added, briefly. "We shared a drink. Good conversation." It was true, all of it, but it felt like holding a match to wet paper, accurate but lacking weight. "I'm glad," Isla said, sipping her champagne. He doesn't usually talk to people at those things. I had to beg him to show up. Elias smiled politely, but didn't reply. Then came the question Sophie hadn't prepared for. "So what have you been up to lately?" Isla asked. It was innocent, or it pretended to be. Sophie answered the only way she knew how. Living quieter, listening more, choosing what matters. It landed. The air between them shifted, just slightly. Elias said, "That's harder than it sounds." She looked at him, held his gaze. "It is, but it's worth it." He didn't look away. Neither did she. That night, Sophie walked home instead of calling a car. Her heels ached. Her hair was starting to fall, but her chest felt steady, solid. Because for the first time, Isla wasn't just younger. She was also more unsure than she let on. And Elias? He was beginning to see the difference. Elias texted her the next morning. "You disappeared fast last night." "What?" Sophie smiled at her phone. Not because it was romantic, but because it was real. "Yes, it helped me think." "Did it help you think about me?" She didn't answer right away, but the truth was yes. She had thought about him, not obsessively, not dramatically, just often. He didn't message again that day, but 2 days later, she got an email. A formal invitation, Elias Sterling requesting her presence at an executive roundtable event for a philanthropic fund she'd once helped start. No notes, no emojis, just a header in time. It wasn't flirty, it wasn't personal, and yet it felt like the most direct thing he'd done so far. The event was held in a downtown hotel, boardroom style, with glass walls, brushed metal chairs, and not a drop of personality in sight. Sophie arrived in black slacks and a crisp blouse. She looked composed, unbothered, like someone who'd never once wondered if she was stepping into a room where a younger woman might be watching. But Isla wasn't there, and that, more than anything, put her on edge. Elias noticed her the moment she entered. He nodded once, then turned his attention back to the panel. But his eyes followed her, even when she wasn't looking. They didn't speak until after. She found him near the elevator, sipping from a bottle of water like it was scotch. "You were sharp," he said. "Always am," she replied. "I didn't mean it as a surprise." She shrugged. "You should." A pause. Then, "You seem more comfortable when she's not around." She blinked. He wasn't asking. He was stating. Sophie leaned against the wall, folding her arms. And who would she be? He didn't flinch. You know. So she said it. Not out of insecurity. Out of clarity. Isla's charming. She knows how to move through a room and make people want to follow her. Elias nodded. But you know how to move through a room and make people listen. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. Because in that sentence, something shifted. She wasn't the past anymore. She was the alternative. They ended up in the hotel bar. It wasn't planned, but it wasn't an accident either. They didn't sit close. They didn't touch. But they talked. And the air between them thickened in the way it only does when something unspoken is gaining weight. She asked him about risk, personal, not professional. He told her he had spent years mistaking control for safety. She told him she had spent years mistaking sacrifice for loyalty. At one point, he looked down at his drink and said, "You remind me of who I was supposed to be." She didn't ask what that meant. She didn't want to break the spell. Instead, she reached for her coat and stood. And when he looked at her, quietly, deeply, she said, "Don't ruin this by making it more than it is." He tilted his head. "And what is it?" She answered without blinking. "The first real conversation either of us has had in a long time." That night, Elias didn't sleep. He sat in his apartment, glass of wine untouched, phone face down, mind racing. Because for the first time in years, someone had seen past the title. And worse, they weren't afraid of what they saw. Sophie didn't see Isla for 2 weeks. She didn't avoid her. Not consciously. She didn't block her number or ignore texts or skip events. But her calendar started filling in different ways. Quiet ways. Ways that allowed her to exist just outside the periphery of Isla's world. She told herself it was coincidence. Timing. A shifting of tides. But deep down she knew something had shifted, and it had her name written all over it. Every message from Elias arrived like a thread tugged loose. Not needy. Not flirty. Just present. "Saw someone today who reminded me of something you said. Do you still go walking in the mornings? There's a gallery opening next week. The art is overrated. The lighting, though, is perfect." He never asked for anything. Never assumed. But the space between their exchanges felt electric, like something waiting to become. And then one quiet Sunday, Isla called. "You've been hiding," she said playfully, "which is very unlike you. I've decided to intervene. Brunch. Tomorrow. 11. You don't get a say." Sophie hesitated. Every bone in her body whispered, "Don't go." But she said yes anyway. Not because she wanted to, because she had to. The restaurant was all glass and marble. Sunlight in every corner, shadows softened by fresh flowers, and the low hum of weekend chatter. Isla looked perfect, of course. Effortlessly sculpted, chic in that unstudied way young women pulled off like breathing. A silk wrap dress. Oversized sunglasses pushed onto her head. Gold hoops and skin that had never known insomnia. She stood to hug Sophie like they hadn't seen each other in months. "You look amazing," Isla said, sliding back into the booth. "That's a new lipstick, isn't it?" "No," Sophie said, smiling faintly. "Just better lighting." Isla laughed. Too easily. They ordered. They talked about nothing. Designers, real estate prices, a new influencer campaign Isla was managing. Sophie nodded, sipped her coffee, listened more than she spoke. Then, mid-sentence, Isla dropped it. "So, how's Elias?" The question hit like a stone in still water. Sophie didn't blink. "Why do you ask?" Isla shrugged. "He's just different lately. More distracted. I used to hear from him all the time. But now it's like, well, I don't know. Maybe I'm imagining it." Sophie said nothing. Isla kept talking. "He mentioned you, by the way." Sophie looked up. "After that roundtable thing. Said you were sharp. That you see things others miss." Sophie nodded. "We've always worked well together. Even briefly." There was a pause. Isla stirred her mimosa with her straw. "Then, you'd tell me if there was something between you, right? It was sugar-coated, but it was a blade." Sophie sat still. The pause stretched. The air between them changed shape. "If there ever is," she said calmly, "you'll be the first to know." Isla's face held. Then she smiled too brightly. "Raise your glass." "To honesty," she said. They clinked glasses. The sound was light. The meaning was not. That night, Sophie stood barefoot in her kitchen, staring out the window. Her phone rested nearby. Face up, screen dark. She hadn't heard from Elias that day, not since the message he sent the night before. But her thumb hovered over his name now. Not to write, just to see. She didn't want to need his voice. Didn't want the way he looked at her, like she was someone to notice, not explain. But she did, and she hated how much she liked it, because it wasn't harmless anymore, and it wouldn't be ever again. She set the phone down, didn't touch it for the rest of the night. But when she finally went to bed, her last thought wasn't guilt. It was this: if he calls tomorrow, I won't stop him. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like someone being replaced. She felt like the choice. The message came just before midnight. Not a question, not a tease. I'm outside. Sophie stared at it. Her heart did that thing. That low, uneven stutter she hadn't felt in a decade. She walked to the window. There, down on the sidewalk beneath the amber glow of a street lamp, was Elias. No driver, no security, just him, hands in his coat pockets, staring up at her building like he didn't care who saw. She didn't text back. She didn't call. She just opened the door. When she reached the lobby, he turned the moment the door opened, like he'd been listening for her steps. He didn't smile, didn't speak. Neither did she. They stood there, breathing in the quiet. Then, finally she asked, "Why are you here?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her like she was a book he'd finally stopped pretending not to read. "Because I've been thinking about you for 9 straight days." Sophie's throat tightened. "That's not a reason. It's the only one I have." She stared at him. He wasn't performing, wasn't selling, just offering. "And what am I supposed to do with that?" she asked. "You can shut the door, or you can let me upstairs, and I'll say what I came to say." The silence stretched. Then Sophie stepped aside. They didn't speak in the elevator. She didn't offer him tea or a drink or a place to sit when they reached her apartment. She just leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, waiting. He stood in the doorway, coat still on. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said. "You already said that." He nodded. "But you don't know what I mean." She didn't respond. So he continued, "I see you everywhere now. In boardrooms, in conversations, in pauses between meetings. When someone makes a clever observation, I wonder if you would have said it first. When I'm in rooms full of noise, I think about how quiet you make everything feel." Sophie looked down. "You should stop." He took a step forward. "I don't want to." "She'll hate you for this," Sophie said. She didn't say Isla's name. She didn't have to. "She doesn't own me," Elias said. "But she thinks she does." His expression darkened. "Then maybe that's her mistake." There was a long, impossible beat. Then Sophie said, "If you cross this line, you don't get to uncross it." He moved closer, slowly. "I don't want to." "Don't say that unless you mean it." His voice was quiet, steady, real. "I've meant it for a while." She didn't kiss him. He didn't touch her. But when she exhaled, long and slow and shaking, something broke between them. Not in anger, in surrender. He stayed for 27 minutes. No drinks, no touching, no pretending, just words. He told her he respected her, wanted her, feared what this would mean, but feared silence more. When he left, she walked him to the door. He turned just before stepping out. "You scare me," he said. "Because I'm older? Because you know who you are?" She didn't reply. She just watched him go. That night, she didn't sleep. Not because she was afraid of what came next, but because, for once, she wasn't afraid at all. The fallout didn't come with fire. It came with silence. No calls, no texts, not even a passive-aggressive voice memo. But Isla posted photos, stories, artfully angled shots with captions that didn't name names but bled subtext. Some people only value you when you leave. Lessons come wrapped in red flags and expensive shoes. Healing loudly, loving selectively. Nothing direct, nothing technically wrong. But every woman over 30 knows when she's being spoken to, even if it's whispered in code. Sophie didn't respond. Not with words, not with reactions, not even with eye contact the next time their paths crossed at a fundraising brunch. Because Sophie understood something Isla hadn't learned yet. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just remains. Elias didn't bring up Isla the next time they met. He picked her up just after dusk on a Thursday. The car wasn't his usual Blacktown car. It was quieter, civilian, as if he was trying to blend in. Sophie wore slacks and a deep green blouse. Elegant, grounded, intentional. She didn't wear jewelry except for a small silver ring that had no story attached. She didn't need it to. They drove in silence for almost 10 minutes. Not awkward silence. The kind that lives between people who know there's more to say and trust that they'll get there. He pulled into the parking lot of a small restaurant tucked behind an old bookstore. There was no valet, no press, no waiting. "This place?" she asked. "No one follows me here," he replied. The restaurant was candlelit and quiet. The kind of place where people didn't try to be seen, where waitstaff moved like ghosts, and couples spoke in low tones that never felt forced. They ordered a bottle of wine, 2 quiet entrees. No one tried to impress anyone. Halfway through the meal, Elias leaned forward slightly. "What do you want, Sophie?" She blinked. "Tonight? No. In 5 years. In 10. What do you want your life to look like when a noise fades?" She thought for a moment, then answered slowly. "Quiet, but not empty. I want a home that feels like breath, not pressure. I want to matter to someone without needing to prove why." He listened, really listened. Then he said, "That's why I keep showing up." She studied him. "And what does it cost you?" He didn't answer immediately. "A reputation, maybe a relationship." With her. He looked down at his glass. Yes, there was no pride in it, no defiance, just truth. After dinner, I didn't drive home. He took her to the river walk, a long stretch of stone and railing lined with lights and benches. The city pulsed quietly in the distance. Cars moved like ants across bridges. Everything was soft. They walked side by side. Their hands didn't touch. Their shoulders didn't brush. But their silence said everything. Then, beneath the third lamp, Elias stopped. "Do you regret it?" Sophie didn't look at him. "No, I regret not wanting something for myself sooner." He exhaled. "She's not going to make this easy." Sophie turned. "You didn't choose easy. You chose me." He nodded. "Just once." Slowly. The next day, Sophie received a gold-trimmed invitation hand-delivered to her door. The Sterling Foundation Legacy Gala, featuring women in leadership. Host, Elias Sterling. Guest of honor, Isla Wren. Her name wasn't listed, not even as a guest speaker, not as a panelist, just a line near the bottom. Formal attire. Guest passes are non-transferable. She folded the invitation, stared at the seam for a full minute. Then she stood, walked to her closet, and unzipped the back of a navy dress she hadn't worn in 2 years. She held it up to the light. The fabric caught it just right. She didn't need an invite to take up space. She was the room. And this time, she wasn't showing up quietly. The gala was held at the Mayfair Grand, a building made of marble and mirrors, where ceilings sparkled and people spoke in practiced tones designed to echo success. Sophie arrived alone. No driver, no escort, no fanfare, just a navy gown tailored to dignity, heels that made no sound on polished floors, and a presence that didn't ask for permission. She didn't check in at the front table. She didn't need to. She gave the attendant a glance, the kind only a woman who had built the building, not just passed through it, could give, and walked straight past the guest list. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with curated elegance. Men in tuxedos, women in gowns that glinted like ambition. Servers moved like wind through candlelight, and music played softly, always second to conversation. At the center of it all, Isla. She was radiant, gold satin that caught the light perfectly. Hair like a shampoo commercial. Smile rehearsed down to the millimeter. She moved through the room like she had choreographed it. Sophie stayed at the edge of the ballroom, not hiding, calculating, waiting for the moment that would say more than an entrance. She caught Isla's eye across the crowd. There was a flicker, a visible tightening of her jaw. Just enough. Then Isla turned back toward a group of donors with a laugh. Elias appeared minutes later. Black suit, polished, watch glinting at his wrist. He hadn't seen her yet, but when he did, his eyes found her like they were returning home. His expression didn't change, but his entire stance did. Sophie turned and walked toward the bar. Slow, composed, like someone who didn't need to be chased to be worth following. She had barely ordered sparkling water before Elias appeared beside her. "You came," he said quietly. "Was I not supposed to?" "You weren't on the list." "Funny. I never needed one before." There was a beat. A charged pause in the middle of crystal and chatter. "You look like someone who came to burn a building down," he said. Sophie finally turned. "No, I came to remind it who laid the first brick." 20 minutes later, the lights dimmed. Elias took the stage. His voice carried, smooth, practiced, every syllable delivered with the authority of a man used to being obeyed. He spoke about innovation, legacy, the value of investing in women who shape the future. Then he introduced Isla, a leader of tomorrow, he called her. Sharp, driven, visionary. She stepped onto the stage with practiced poise. Her speech was perfect, gracious, humble bragging, full of elegant pauses and words like collaboration and empowerment. She even mentioned mentorship, but not Sophie. Not once. Sophie didn't flinch. She sat in the second row, center aisle, back straight, chin level, not offended, just observant. Because this wasn't about being erased. It was about letting them realize what happened when you tried. After the speeches, the ballroom buzzed again. Champagne flowed. A string quartet played something subtle. Photos in front of branded banners began. Elias barely moved from the edge of the room. He watched conversations, dodged cameras, but his eyes were on Sophie. Always on Sophie. Isla approached near the end of the night. Smile tight, chin high. "You made it," she said. "I did. It's always interesting to see the past show up to witness the present." Sophie didn't blink. "Be careful, Isla. Not everything before you is behind you." The smile cracked. "Just for a second. Elias sees me," Isla said. "No, Sophia de Blaise. He used to." Then she walked away. Not fast, not triumphant, just unbothered. Because sometimes the win isn't loud. It's just final. Elias texted her the next morning. "You disappeared fast last night." "What?" Sophie smiled at her phone. Not because it was romantic, but because it was real. "Yes, it helped me think." "Did it help you think about me?" She didn't answer right away. But the truth was yes. She had thought about him. Not obsessively, not dramatically, just often. He didn't message again that day. But 2 days later, she got an email. A formal invitation. Elias Sterling requesting her presence at an executive roundtable event for a philanthropic fund she'd once helped start. No notes, no emojis, just a header in time. It wasn't flirty. It wasn't personal. And yet, it felt like the most direct thing he'd done so far. The event was held in a downtown hotel, boardroom style, with glass walls, brushed metal chairs, and not a drop of personality in sight. Sophie arrived in black slacks and a crisp blouse. She looked composed, unbothered, like someone who'd never once wondered if she was stepping into a room where a younger woman might be watching. But Isla wasn't there, and that, more than anything, put her on edge. Elias noticed her the moment she entered. He nodded once, then turned his attention back to the panel. But his eyes followed her, even when she wasn't looking. They didn't speak until after. She found him near the elevator, sipping from a bottle of water like it was scotch. "You were sharp," he said. "Always am," she replied. "I didn't mean it as a surprise." She shrugged. "You should." A pause. Then, "You seem more comfortable when she's not around." She blinked. He wasn't asking. He was stating. Sophie leaned against the wall, folding her arms. And who would she be? He didn't flinch. "You know." So she said it. Not out of insecurity. Out of clarity. Isla's charming. She knows how to move through a room and make people want to follow her. Elias nodded. "But you know how to move through a room and make people listen." She didn't speak. Didn't need to. Because in that sentence, something shifted. She wasn't the past anymore. She was the alternative. They ended up in the hotel bar. It wasn't planned, but it wasn't an accident either. They didn't sit close. They didn't touch. But they talked. And the air between them thickened in the way it only does when something unspoken is gaining weight. She asked him about risk, personal, not professional. He told her he had spent years mistaking control for safety. She told him she had spent years mistaking sacrifice for loyalty. At one point, he looked down at his drink and said, "You remind me of who I was supposed to be." She didn't ask what that meant. She didn't want to break the spell. Instead, she reached for her coat and stood. And when he looked at her, quietly, deeply, she said, "Don't ruin this by making it more than it is." He tilted his head. "And what is it?" She answered without blinking. The first real conversation either of us has had in a long time. That night, Elias didn't sleep. He sat in his apartment, glass of wine untouched, phone face down, mind racing. Because for the first time in years, someone had seen past the title. And worse, they weren't afraid of what they saw.